A famous line often attributed to Nathan Rothschild claims that the man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and that he himself held that lever. Whether or not the exact wording is authentic, the idea captures a larger truth about how the Rothschild family shaped markets, public finance, and the decisions of states. Their reach influenced the way modern economies matured and how governments weighed risk, a legacy that still touches daily life. For a long stretch of the 19th century, politicians and ministers measured their moves against what the Rothschilds might fund, oppose, or simply ignore. Many people already know the family as a wealthy banking dynasty, yet even that label understates their impact on the currents of history. Another notorious saying, also linked to Nathan, goes, "I care not who sits on the throne of England, so long as I can issue the money." Whether paraphrased or not, it hints at a core insight. Cash flows bind the gears of power, often more tightly than crowns or titles can. Nathan was one of 5 brothers who headed the family's main branches, each embedded in a European capital, and each deeply intertwined with the financial systems of its host country. From financing resistance to Napoleon to fueling the Industrial Revolution's momentum, the Rothschilds became one of the defining families of the modern age. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now, let's continue. Their story begins with Mayer Amschel Rothschild, a man of humble origin whose intellect and discipline carried him far beyond the cramped lanes of his birth. He entered the world in 1744 in Frankfurt's Judengasse, a narrow street that contained a community of several thousand Jewish residents pressed together by law and prejudice. Life there was bounded by curfews, religious restrictions, and a web of petty rules that excluded Jews from parks, coffee houses, and many forms of public gathering. Even ordinary sociability could be a risk. Meetings larger than a pair might draw penalties. That was the atmosphere Mayer breathed as a child. He was on a path to the rabbinate, honoring family hopes, until the early death of his parents rerouted his future. To support himself, he entered an established banking house as an apprentice, where ledgers, bills of exchange, and bullion became his textbooks. One specialty he absorbed early was the trade in rare ancient coins, Roman, Persian, and Byzantine pieces sought by the European nobility. The insight that high-status collectors would pay premiums for authenticity and provenance planted a seed he would later cultivate. Mayer's first routine tasks involved sorting coins brought to Frankfurt's semi-annual fairs, which attracted merchants from far beyond the region. By 19, he had mastered current techniques in finance, and he returned to his father's trading shop with hard-won knowledge and widening ambition. He set himself up as a dealer in rare coins, and the speed with which he developed a reputation drew the attention of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse. Impressed, the prince named Mayer a court factor, a role reserved for trusted Jewish financiers who could arrange credit, source luxuries, and manage discreet transactions. The appointment was transformational. It elevated Mayer above the cramped limits of the ghetto and gave him the clientele and collateral he needed to expand. In those years, he laid the foundations of the family's future power. As trade grew, Mayer accelerated. He dispatched his sons to open branches in different states, and he handed them 2 rules that would define the family's strategy for decades. First, do business with reigning houses whenever possible. The credit of princes buys not only profit but protection. Second, raise sons to continue the work abroad and keep the network strong. The plan might sound cold to modern ears, yet its logic was hard to deny. Spreading operations across borders reduced exposure to any one ruler's whims or a single market shock. It was portfolio diversification applied to politics and geography. Cultivating favor with local monarchs did more than win payments. It wrapped the business in a shield of prestige. By the early 1800s, the brothers had planted flags in 5 cities: Naples, Vienna, Paris, London, and Frankfurt, knitting an unprecedented cross-border banking structure. Acting as financiers to multiple powers gave them an unusual neutrality. They could move money across frontiers, grease diplomacy, and steer outcomes quietly, as if from backstage, while offering clients an ever broader range of services. What began with coins and luxury goods soon deepened into government finance. Wars, especially, created opportunity. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic conflicts from 1792 to 1815 enlarged the Rothschild balance sheet as few peacetime ventures could. The family arranged loans for warring princes, organized the movement of grain, cotton, and colonial produce, and even supplied arms, much of it legal, some of it skirting blockades as continental systems tried to choke British trade. Their strategy was brutally simple: back both sides where feasible, and profit from payments, arbitrage, and the sheer velocity of funds. In Paris, James the Jacob Rothschild extended credit to Napoleon's regime. In London, Nathan supported Britain and the coalition led by Wellington. Over time, the brothers' calculations tilted toward the British side, which offered better prospects and sturdier institutions. As that shift occurred, funds to Napoleon's army tightened. At the same time, Nathan expanded British financing, making sure Wellington's campaigns remained solvent. The family did not fire a shot, yet their credit lines influenced the fate of a continent. Nathan's market sense was as sharp as his appetite for speed. Early in the wars, a series of French victories triggered panic in London and depressed British bond prices. Nathan bought aggressively at those lows. He also built a private courier network to receive battle news ahead of rivals, enabling him to act before official dispatches reached the city. By the time word of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo spread, Nathan had already positioned himself, and the surge in prices delivered enormous gains. Such maneuvers minted him as a legend and invited resentment. In France, where Napoleon had rolled back many discriminations against Jews, a prominent Jewish house financially aligned with his enemies angered commentators and intellectuals. As industrialization accelerated and social strains widened, anti-Jewish rhetoric found a ready symbol in the Rothschild name. For critics, the family personified borderless capital and inequality. Their visibility made them an easy target for blame. Those narratives would be exploited later by nationalist movements, even as the family kept adapting. After the guns fell silent, the Rothschilds pivoted further into government securities, insurance, and shares of industrial enterprises. They invested in railways, coal, and metals, laying tracks and building furnaces as Europe's industrial metabolism quickened. Mayer, aware that time was short, tried to future-proof the dynasty. His will spelled out strict rules of inheritance that favored male descendants and consolidated control. The result, by design, encouraged marriages within the extended family, echoing the Habsburgs in its intensity. Between the 1820s and the late 19th century, dozens of unions linked cousins and preserved capital inside the house. Another deliberate choice was to keep fortune in liquid claims bonds, bills, and shares, rather than in palaces or piles of bullion that could be seized in a riot. If hatred flared, there would be little for looters to grab. The ledger, not the manor, held the wealth. Among the brothers, Nathan in London stood out. In 1835, he secured rights to mercury mines in Spain, a coup that gave the family a near-global hold on a metal critical for refining gold and silver. He also deepened ties with the Bank of England and the Royal Mint, helping to refine precious metals and anchor the city's credibility. Profits were plowed back into the business. The group expanded in oil and non-ferrous metals, amassing major positions in companies like Rio Tinto and, later, Royal Dutch Shell. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschild name could move markets. Their influence extended into culture and science as well. They collected art, supported museums and galleries, and backed expeditions that brought home zoological and horticultural treasures. Those collections enriched libraries and botanic gardens, and still color the institutions that display them today. States turned to the family at moments of stress. After France's defeat by Prussia in 1871, Rothschild loans helped the government stay afloat. In London, the house advanced £4 million on short notice so Britain could buy a major stake in the Suez Canal Company, tightening imperial links to India by slashing sailing times. The same capacity to concentrate capital also fueled empire building in Africa. Financing associated with figures like Cecil Rhodes fed the diamond trade and drew fortunes into companies such as De Beers. Across the Atlantic, American industry likewise touched the Rothschild orbit, through positions in the National City Bank of Cleveland and connections to financiers such as Jacob Schiff, who was born in the Frankfurt neighborhood, where the Rothschilds had roots credit flowed to upstarts like John D. Rockefeller, as Standard Oil consolidated the refinery business. Rebates and rail deals multiplied the firm's edge and made Rockefeller one of the richest men in the world. Another thread of the family story runs through Jewish communal life and the politics of a homeland. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, a public statement of support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, addressed to Lionel Walter Rothschild as a figurehead of British Jewry. Long before and after that moment, the family had funded settlement, education, and charitable works tied to Jewish life. In Frankfurt alone, they administered dozens of foundations, underwriting libraries, hospitals, orphanages, elder care, and schools. Honors followed. Mayer's 5 sons were made barons of the Austrian Empire. In Britain, a Rothschild entered Parliament and, later, the peerage. The head of the London branch was often treated as an unofficial leader of British Jewry. Power, however, does not immunize any house against time. The family's decline came in fits. The Naples branch shuttered in 1863 after Italian unification, and the capture of the city by forces under Garibaldi reshaped the political map. The Frankfurt branch closed in 1901 for lack of a male heir. The Vienna branch suffered a catastrophe after the Nazi annexation of Austria. Family members fled or were imprisoned. Properties and art were seized, and release sometimes came only after ransoms. In occupied France, assets were taken. Although the Paris business survived the war, it did not outlast later politics. In 1982, under a socialist government, the Paris Bank was nationalized, ending that original branch. By then, London remained the strongest of the 5. Even with the setbacks, the Rothschilds kept reinventing themselves. In the 21st century, the family consolidated holdings under a single umbrella and structured their interests across financial services, real estate, mining, energy, and philanthropy, while also stewarding celebrated wineries around the world. Many family members work within these firms or invest alongside them. One of the oldest institutions with roots in Nathan's era still operates as a modern bank, reporting robust revenues, profits, and assets under management. However one adds the numbers, the combined holdings place the family among the wealthiest on earth. Historians will continue to debate the true extent of Rothschild power, to separate legend from ledger. Yet the outline is hard to dispute. A family that began in a cramped lane built a network that spanned capitals, financed wars and railroads, shifted commodity markets, and funded art and science. Their trajectory turns on contingent moments. If Mayer's parents had lived longer, he might have remained on the path to the rabbinate rather than entering finance. Alter that one variable, and the financial plumbing of 19th century Europe might have looked different. Perhaps Napoleon's story would have ended otherwise. Perhaps Britain's reach would have narrowed. Perhaps other names would dominate the ledgers we study today. For better and for worse, the Rothschilds left a deep mark on the systems that organize modern life. The lesson they intuited early endures. The flow of money does not merely accompany power, it helps to create it. Consider the mechanics that made their network formidable: speed, discretion, and trust. Couriers on horseback beat official mail. Coded letters reduce the risk of interception. Brothers priced credit according to political weather, better than most treasuries could. They arbitraged exchange rates between cities and turned information into profit before competitors even knew a market had moved. That edge was not sorcery. It was logistics and discipline. It also rested on reputation. A state that defaulted might find not just one banker, but 5 closing their windows. Conversely, a prince who honored obligations could tap into a continental pool of savings. In this way, the family functioned as both participants in and referees of the early international financial system, nudging rulers toward credibility because credibility lowered costs for everyone. Consider the mechanics that made their network formidable: speed, discretion, and trust. Couriers on horseback beat official mail. Coded letters reduced the risk of interception. Brothers priced credit according to political weather better than most treasuries could. They arbitraged exchange rates between cities and turned information into profit before competitors even knew a market had moved. That edge was not sorcery. It was logistics and discipline. It also rested on reputation. A state that defaulted might find not just one banker, but 5 closing their windows. Conversely, a prince who honored obligations could tap into a continental pool of savings. In this way, the family functioned as both participants in and referees of the early international financial system, nudging rulers toward credibility because credibility lowered costs for everyone. Consider the mechanics that made their network formidable: speed, discretion, and trust. Couriers on horseback beat official mail. Coded letters reduced the risk of interception. Brothers priced credit according to political weather better than most treasuries could. They arbitraged exchange rates between cities and turned information into profit before competitors even knew a market had moved. That edge was not sorcery. It was logistics and discipline. It also rested on reputation. A state that defaulted might find not just one banker, but 5 closing their windows. Conversely, a prince who honored obligations could tap into a continental pool of savings. In this way, the family functioned as both participants in and referees of the early international financial system, nudging rulers toward credibility because credibility lowered costs for everyone. Consider the mechanics that made their network formidable: speed, discretion, and trust. Couriers on horseback beat official mail. Coded letters reduced the risk of interception. Brothers priced credit according to political weather better than most treasuries could. They arbitraged exchange rates between cities and turned information into profit before competitors even knew a market had moved. That edge was not sorcery. It was logistics and discipline. It also rested on reputation. A state that defaulted might find not just one banker, but 5 closing their windows. Conversely, a prince who honored obligations could tap into a continental pool of savings. In this way, the family functioned as both participants in and referees of the early international financial system, nudging rulers toward credibility because credibility lowered costs for everyone. Consider the mechanics that made their network formidable: speed, discretion, and trust. Couriers on horseback beat official mail. Coded letters reduced the risk of interception. Brothers priced credit according to political weather better than most treasuries could. They arbitraged exchange rates between cities and turned information into profit before competitors even knew a market had moved. That edge was not sorcery. It was logistics and discipline. It also rested on reputation. A state that defaulted might find not just one banker, but 5 closing their windows. Conversely, a prince who honored obligations could tap into a continental pool of savings. In this way, the family functioned as both participants in and referees of the early international financial system, nudging rulers toward credibility because credibility lowered costs for everyone. Consider the mechanics that made their network formidable: speed, discretion, and trust. Couriers on horseback beat official mail. Coded letters reduced the risk of interception. Brothers priced credit according to political weather better than most treasuries could. They arbitraged exchange rates between cities and turned information into profit before competitors even knew a market had moved. That edge was not sorcery. It was logistics and discipline. It also rested on reputation. A state that defaulted might find not just one banker, but 5 closing their windows. Conversely, a prince who honored obligations could tap into a continental pool of savings. In this way, the family functioned as both participants in and referees of the early international financial system, nudging rulers toward credibility because credibility lowered costs for everyone. The cultural dimension mattered too. By endowing hospitals and schools, curating collections, and opening galleries, the family translated abstract finance into public goods. That spending softened the edges of resentment and built bridges into civic life. It also reflected a genuine curiosity. Some Rothschilds were naturalists, others music lovers, still others patrons of emerging scholars. Wealth in their hands became archives, gardens, and concert halls as much as debentures. Those gifts endured even when political tides turned against them. Their preference for liquidity was a hedge against the volatility of prejudice. Unlike land, which can be seized, or factories, which can be smashed, a claim recorded in many ledgers and jurisdictions is harder to erase. When violence threatened, the Rothschild fortune could contract into paper and numbers, then expand again when safety returned. The strategy anticipated harsh realities without surrendering to them. In the end, the family story reads like a primer on networks: build nodes, move information quickly, price risk honestly, and cultivate patrons without becoming their captive. They succeeded when those elements aligned and stumbled, when geopolitics overwhelmed even their foresight. That duality, brilliance, and limits keeps the narrative human. It is not a tale of omnipotence. It is the record of people who understood earlier than most that finance was the infrastructure beneath the rails, the armies, and the ministries. They laid cables of credit across a continent and watched as history ran along them. Their calculus joined prudence with audacity, and their methods became templates for global finance. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments, your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our others video.